Welcome to Leaping Larry's Revolutionary Reading Theatre.
Oh, hello there. Welcome to Leaping Larry's Revolutionary Reading Theatre. Oh, I smoked a lot there in the intro to try and get it smoky in here. Today, we of course are going to be reading, as you comrades decided at the end of the last read, Falcon. What Falcon's done, chat. Look at what Falcon has done. Wait a sec. Is this what you wanted? We're getting corged, Giddy. We're getting corged up. Tell them how you're getting corged up. Look at her. She's so wild. Yeah, it's your fault, Falcon. You did it. There we go. I corged ya. You got corged. You've been corged. And now we will begin our read. Kwame Nkrumah, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. To the face. Thank you so much for the raid, comrade. Appreciate that. Welcome in. Just in time for us to start the read here. Welcome in. We're gonna at least read. We're just starting this read today. Neocolonialism: The Last Stage of Imperialism by Kwame Nkrumah. Appreciate that raid. Thank you so much. Shout out to Heel to the Face. Welcome in, comrade. The neocolonialism of today represents imperialism in its final and perhaps its most dangerous stage. In the past, it was possible to convert a country upon which a neocolonial regime had been imposed, Egypt in the 19th century is an example, into a colonial territory. This process is no longer feasible. Old-fashioned colonialism is by no means entirely abolished. It still constitutes an African problem, but it is everywhere on the retreat. Once a territory has become nominally independent, it is no longer possible, as it was in the last century, to reverse the process. Existing colonies may linger on, but no new colonies will be created. In place of colonialism as the main instrument of imperialism, we have today neocolonialism. Starting a handbook of revolution. Nice, Heel to Face. Nice. The essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to it, is, in theory, independent, and it has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system, and thus its political policy, is directed from outside. The method and form of this direction can take various shapes. For example, in an extreme case, the troops of the imperial power may garrison the territory of the neocolonial state and control the government of it. More often, however, neocolonist control is exercised through economic or monetary means. The neocolonial state may be obliged to take the manufactured products of the imperialist power to the exclusion of competing products from elsewhere. Control over government policy, the neocolonial state may be secured by payments towards the cost of running the state, by the provision of civil servants in positions where they can dictate policy, and by monetary control over foreign exchange through the imposition of a banking system controlled by the imperial power. Where neocolonialism exists, the power exercising control is often the state, which formerly ruled the territory in question. But this is not necessarily so. For example, in the case of South Vietnam, the former imperial power was France, but neocolonial control of the state has now gone to the United States. It is possible that neocolonial control may be exercised by a consortium of financial interests, which are not specifically identifiable with any particular state. The control of the Congo by great international financial concerns is a case in point. The result of neocolonialism is that foreign capital is used for the exploitation rather than for the development of the less developed parts of the world. Investment under neocolonialism increases rather than decreases the gap between the rich and the poor countries of the world. The struggle against neocolonialism is not aimed at excluding the capital of the developed world from operating in less developed countries. It is aimed at preventing the financial power of the developed countries being used in such a way as to impoverish the less developed. Non-alignment, as practiced by Ghana and many other countries, is based on cooperation with all states, whether they be capitalist, socialist, or have a mixed economy. Such a policy, therefore, involves foreign investment from capitalist countries, but it must be invested in accordance with the national plan drawn up by the government of the non-aligned state, with its own interests in mind. The issue is not what return the foreign investor receives on his investments. He may, in fact, do better for himself if he invests in a non-aligned country than if he invests in a neo-colonial one. The question is one of power. The state, in the grip of neocolonialism, is not master of its own destiny. It is this factor which makes neocolonialism such a serious threat to world peace. The growth of nuclear weapons has made out of date the old-fashioned balance of power, which rested upon the ultimate sanction of a major war. Certainty of mutual mass destruction effectively prevents either of the great power blocks from threatening the other with the possibility of a worldwide war. And military conflict has thus become confined to limited war. For these, neocolonialism is the breeding ground. Squidideer, welcome in, comrade. Get a shout out for Squidideer, please. Any mods active in chat, please? Welcome in, comrade. Hope you're well. We're just reading Kwame Nkrumah, Neocolonialism. This is, of course, written, I think, what is, let's say 1965, yeah. Of course, Kwame Nkrumah was revolutionary leader of Ghana, for those who don't know. And it's also where Comrade Kwame Nkrumah, or Kwame Ture took part of his name. Such wars can, of course, take place in countries which are not neo-colonials controlled. Indeed, their object may be to establish in a small but independent country a neo-colonialist regime. Okay, it'll be over. It should be over. Yeah, because someone got to it before you, Falcon. Thank you, though. Follow Squidideer, comrades. Yep, exactly, Squidideer. Great speaker as well. The evil of neocolonialism is that it prevents the formation of those large units which would make impossible limited war. Give one example. If Africa was united, no major power bloc would attempt to subdue it by limited war, because from the very nature of limited war, what can be achieved by it is itself limited. It is only where small states exist that it is possible, by landing a few thousand Marines or by financing a mercenary force, to secure a decisive result. The restriction of military action of limited wars is, however, no guarantee of world peace, and is likely to be a factor which will ultimately involve the great power blocs in a world war, however much both are determined to avoid it. Limited war, once embarked upon, achieves a momentum of its own. Of this, the War of South Vietnam is only one example. It escalates despite the desire of the great power blocs to keep it limited. While this particular war may be prevented from leading to a world conflict, the multiplication of similar limited wars can only... Who is writing this intro? Hold on one sec. I wish I knew who wrote this introduction. But okay. It doesn't seem like this is the original introduction. Neocolonialism is also the worst form of imperialism. For those who practice it, it means power without responsibility. For those who suffer from it, it means exploitation without redress. In the days of old-fashioned colonialism, the imperial power had at least to explain and justify at home the actions it was taking abroad. In the colony, those who served the ruling imperial power could at least look to its protection against any violent move by the opponents. With neocolonialism, neither is the case. Above all, neocolonialism, like colonialism before it, postpones the facing of social issues, which will have to be faced by the fully developed sector of the world before the danger of world war can be eliminated or the problem of world poverty resolved. Neocolonialism, like colonialism, is an attempt to exploit the social conflicts of the capitalist countries. Temporary success of this policy can be seen in the ever-widening gap between the richer and the poorer nations of the world. But the internal contradictions and conflicts of neocolonialism make it certain that it cannot endure as a permanent world policy. How should it be brought to an end is a problem that should be studied above all by the developed nations of the world, because it is they who will feel the full impact of the ultimate failure. The longer it continues, the more certain it is that its inevitable collapse will destroy the social system of which they have made it a foundation. The reason for its development in the post-war period can be briefly summarized. The problem which faced the wealthy nations of the world at the end of the Second War was the impossibility of returning to the pre-war situation, in which there was a great gulf between the few rich nations and the many poor. Irrespective of what particular political party was in power, the internal pressures in the rich countries of the world were such that no post-war capitalist country could survive unless it became a welfare state. And largely in part of the US, because of the USSR and stuff, by the way. There might be differences in degree to the extent of the social benefits given to the industrial and agricultural workers, but what was everywhere impossible was a return to mass unemployment and to the low level of living in the pre-war years. From the end of the 19th century onward, colonies had been regarded as the source of wealth which could be used to mitigate the class conflicts in the capitalist states, and, as will be explained later, this policy had some success. But it failed in its ultimate object because the pre-war capitalist states were so organized internally that the bulk of the profit made from colossal colonial possessions found its way into the pockets of the capitalist class, and not into those of the workers. Far from achieving the object intended, the working class parties at times tended to identify their interests with those of the colonial peoples, and the imperialist powers found themselves engaged upon a conflict on two fronts: at home with their own workers, and abroad against the growing forces of colonial liberation. The post-war period inaugurated a very different colonial policy. A deliberate attempt was made to divert colonial earnings from the wealthy class and use them instead generally to finance the welfare state. As will be seen from the examples given later, this was the method consciously adopted even by those working class leaders who had before the war regarded the colonial people as their natural allies against their capitalist enemies at home. At first, it was presumed that this object could be achieved by maintaining the pre-war colonial system. Experience soon proved that attempts to do so would be disastrous and would only provoke colonial wars, thus dissipating the anticipated gains from the continuance of the colonial regime. Britain, in particular, realized this at an early stage, and the correctness of the British judgment at the time has subsequently been demonstrated by the defeat of French colonialism in the Far East and Algeria, and the failure of the Dutch to retain any of their former colonial empire. The system of neocolonialism was therefore instituted, and in the short run, it has served the developed powers admirably. It is in the long run that its consequences are likely to be catastrophic for them. Neocolonialism is based upon the principle of breaking up former large united colonial territories to a number of small, non viable states, which are incapable of independent development and must rely upon the former imperial power for defense and even internal security. Their economic and financial systems are linked, as in colonial days, with those of former colonial ruler. At first sight, the scheme would appear to have many advantages for the developed countries of the world. All the profits of neocolonialism can be secured if, in any given area, a reasonable proportion of the state have a neocolonial system. This is not necessary that they all should have one. Unless small states can combine, they must be compelled to sell their primary products at prices dictated by the developed nations and by their manufactured goods at the prices fixed by them. So long as neocolonialism can prevent political and economic conditions optimum development, the developing countries, whether they are under neocolonialist control or not, will be unable to create a large enough market to support industrialization. In the same way, they will lack the financial strength to force the developed countries to accept their primary products at a fair price. In neocolonial territories, since the former colonial power has, in theory, relinquished political control, if the social conditions occasioned by neocolonialism cause a revolt, the local neocolonialist government can be sacrificed and another equally subservient one substituted in its place. On the other hand, if any continent where neocolonialism exists on a wide scale, the same social pressures which can produce revolts in neocolonial territories also affect those states which have refused to accept the system. And therefore, neocolonialist nations have a ready-made weapon with which they can threaten their opponents if they appear successfully to be challenging the system. But Lawrence, what about free trade? I'm for equal trade. Fuck free trade. These advantages, which seem at first sight so obvious, are, however, on examination, illusory, because they fail to take in consideration the facts of the world today. I'm for equal trade, not free trade. The introduction of neocolonialism increases the rivalry between great powers, which was provoked by the old-style colonialism. However, little real power the government of neocolonial state may possess, it must have, from the very fact of its nominal independence, certain area of maneuver. It may not be able to exist without a neocolonial master, but it may still have the ability to change masters. The ideal neocolonial state would be one which was wholly subservient to neocolonialist interests. The existence of the socialist nations makes it impossible to enforce the full rigor of the neocolonial system. The existence of an alternative system is itself a challenge to the neocolonialist regime. Warnings about the dangers of communist subversion are likely to be two-edged, since they bring to the notice of those living under the neocolonial system the possibility of a change of regime. In fact, neocolonialism is the victim of its own contradictions. In order to make it attractive to those upon whom it is practiced, it must be shown as capable of raising their living standards. But the economic object of neocolonialism is to keep those standards depressed in the interest of the developed countries. It is only when this contradiction is understood that the failure of innumerable aid programs, many of them well-intentioned, can be explained. Free trade. You have to buy my machines with 0% tariffs, and I'm gonna buy my crops from you with 0% tariff. And yeah, exactly, powerful finger. and then they owe this debt, and then, of course, what do? They say, well, you owe so much debt, you're going to have to reduce your consumption. And what does reduce consumption mean in practice? Well, it means you have to cut education, you have to cut healthcare. Because, of course, if you keep a comprador leaders in charge, especially, they're not going to want to cut from that. And they definitely can't cut from their military and their policing, which is required to keep this class system intact. In the first place, the rulers of a neocolonial states derive their authority to govern not from the will of the people, but from the support which they obtain from their neocolonialist masters. They have therefore little interest in developing education, strengthening the bargaining power of the workers employed by expatriate firms, or indeed by taking any steps which would challenge the colonial pattern of commerce and industry, which is the object of neocolonialism to preserve. Aid, therefore, to a neocolonial state is merely a revolving credit, paid by the neocolonial master, passing through the neocolonial state and returning to the neocolonial master in the form of increased profits. Yeah, absolutely powerful. Secondly, it is in the field of aid that the rivalry of individual developed states first manifests itself. So long as neocolonialism persists, so long will spheres of interest persist. This makes multilateral aid, which is in fact the only effective form of aid, possible. Once multilateral aid begins and neocolonial's masters are faced by the hostility of vested interests in their own country, their manufacturers naturally object to any attempt to raise the price of the raw materials, which they obtain from the neocolonial's territory in question, or to the establishment there of manufacturing industries which might compete directly or indirectly with their own exports to the territory. Even education is suspect, as likely to produce a student movement, and it is, of course, true that in many less developed countries, the students have been in the vanguard of the fight against neocolonialism. In the end, the situation arises that the only type of aid which the neocolonialist masters considers as safe is military aid. Once a neocolonialist territory is brought to such a state of economic chaos and misery that revolt actually breaks out, then, and only then, is there no limit to the generosity of the neocolonial overlord, provided, of course, that the funds supplied are utilized exclusively for military purposes. Any of this sounding familiar to anyone right now? Military aid, in fact, marks the last stage of neocolonialism, and its effect is self destructive. Sooner or later, the weapons supplied pass into the hands of the opponents of the neocolonialist regime, and the war itself increases the social misery which originally provoked it. Double-edged sword, you see. Yeah. Neocolonialism is a millstone around the necks of the developed countries which practiced it. Lest they can rid themselves of it, it will drown them. Previously, the developed powers could escape from the contradictions of neocolonialism by substituting it for direct colonialism. Such a solution is no longer possible, and the reasons for it have been well explained by Mr. Owen Lattimore, the United States Far Eastern expert and advisor to Chiang Kai-shek. In the immediate post-war period, he wrote, quote, Asia, which was so easily swayed and swiftly subjugated by conquerors in the 18th and 19th century, displayed an amazing ability to stubbornly to resist modern armies equipped with airplanes, tanks, motor vehicles, and mobile artillery. Formerly, big territories were conquered in Asia with small forces. Income, first of all, from plunder, then from direct taxes, and lastly from trade. Capital investments and long term exploitation covered with incredible speed the expenditure for military operations. This arithmetic represented a great temptation to strong countries. Now they have run up against another arithmetic, and it discourages them. Unquote. The same arithmetic is likely to apply throughout the less developed world. This book is therefore an attempt to examine neocolonialism not only in its African context and its relation to African unity, but in world perspective. No, neocolonialism is by no means exclusively an African question. Long before it was practiced in large scale in Africa, it was an established system in other parts of the world. Nowhere has it proved successful, either in raising living standards or in ultimately benefiting countries which had indulged in. Marx predicted that the growing gap between the wealth of the possessing classes and the workers it employs would ultimately produce a conflict fatal to capitalism in each individual capitalist state. This conflict between the rich and the poor has now been transferred on the international scene. But for proof of what is acknowledged to be happening, it is no longer necessary to consult the classical Marxist writers. The situation is set out with the utmost clarity in the leading organs of capitalist opinion. Take, for example, the following extracts from the Wall Street Journal, the newspaper which perhaps best reflects United States capitalist thinking. In its issue of 12th May 1965, under the headline Poor Nation's Plight, the paper first analyzes which countries are considered industrial and which backward. There is, it explains, no rigid method of classification. Nevertheless, it points out a generally used breakdown, however, has recently been maintained by the International Monetary Fund because, in the words of the IMF official, the economic demarcation in the world is getting increasingly apparent. The breakdown, the official says, is based on simple common sense. Are Taiwan, Japan, South Korea neo-colonial? Well, like, I would like South Korea is definitely neo-colonial. Taiwan, I mean, I don't know if you'd say Taiwan is or not. Taiwan is Taiwan, I would say, is in a struggle against being made into a neo-colonial regime by the U.S. currently. And Japan, yeah, Japan is neo-colonial. Definitely. Yeah, exactly. They were made into, and part of the reason why Powerful Finger, they modeled them into being this, right? Yeah, and that's why I say the US does, like, that Taiwan does vie for their aid and stuff. So they're like in a struggle to maintain their neo-colonialist regime while China is putting pressure to stop it. And I would say large amounts of Taiwanese people in Taiwan themselves are also like against the idea of Taiwan being independent, right? Like, for whatever reason, they support this or that government, but the majority of people in Taiwan do see themselves as part of China. But yeah, those three you listed, absolutely, that's neocolonialism. In the IMS view, the industrial countries are the United States, United Kingdom, most West European nations, Canada, and Japan. A special category called Other Developed Areas includes such other European lands such as Finland, Greece, and Ireland, plus Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. The IMF's less developed category embraces all of Latin America and nearly all of the Middle East, non-communist Asia, and Africa. In other words, the backward countries are those situated in the neo-colonial areas. Yeah, independence is the least supported powerful, which is again saying something when the KMT is the most progressive political faction. Your most progressive when that's your most progressive political party, you're that whew, shit's fucked, you know? Yeah, and the US worked for a long time to try and make Yugoslavia basically a neo-colonial puppet, right? And then at the end, when USSR was overthrown, it realized that it no longer even had to try and pretend to do that and could just bomb them indiscriminately. After quoting figures to support its argument, the Wall Street Journal comments on this situation. The industrial nations have added nearly 2 billion to their reserves, which now approximate 52 billion. At the same time, the reserves of less developed groups not only have stopped rising, but have declined some $200 million. To analysts such as Britain's Miss Ward, the significance of such statistics is clear. Hey Ahmed, welcome. The economic gap is rapidly widening between a white, placid, highly bourgeois, very wealthy, very small North Atlantic elite and everybody else. And this is not a very comfortable heritage to leave to one's children. Unquote. Everybody else, quote unquote, includes approximately 2/3 of the population of the Earth, spread through about 100 nations. This is no new problem. In the opening paragraph of his book, The War on World Poverty, written in 1953, the present British Labour leader, Mr. Harold Wilson, summarized the major problem of the world as he then saw it. For the vast majority of humankind, the most urgent problem is not war or communism, cost of living or taxation, it is hunger. Over, what is that, 1 billion? Over 1,500,000,000 people. Something like 2/3 of the world's population are living in conditions of acute hunger, defined in terms of identifiable nutritional disease. The hunger is at the same time the effect and cause of the poverty, squalor, and misery in which they live. Its consequences are likewise understood. The correspondent of Wall Street Journal, previously quoted, underlines them. Quote, many diplomats and economists view the implications as overwhelmingly and dangerously political. Unless the present decline can be reversed, these analysts fear the United States and other wealthy industrial powers of the West face a distinct possibility, in the words of British economist Barbara Ward, of a sort of international class war. Don't let the bourgeoisie be more class conscious than you, Jack. What is lacking are any positive proposals for dealing with the situation. All the Wall Street Journal's correspondent can do is point out that the traditional methods recommended for curing the evils are only likely to make the situation worse. It has been argued that developed nations should effectively assist the poorer parts of the world, and that the whole world should be turned into a welfare state. However, there seems to little prospect that anything of this sort could be achieved. The so-called aid programs to help backward economies represent, according to a rough UN estimate, only 1/2 of 1% of the total income of industrial countries. But when it comes to the prospect of increasing such aid, the mood is one of pessimism. Welcome in, Richmond. A large school of thought holds that expanded share of the wealth schemes are idealistic and impractical. This school contends climate, undeveloped human skills, lack of natural resources, and other factors, not just a lack of money, restrict economic progress in many of the lands, and that the countries lack the personnel with the training, or will use vastly expanded aid effectively. Share the wealth schemes, according to this view, would be like pouring money down a bottomless well, weakening the donor nations without effectively curing the ills of recipients. One billion people on Earth don't own a pair of shoes. That sounds, yeah. I mean, that was 1,700,000 that were hungry. So, the absurdity of this argument is demonstrated by the fact that every one of the reasons quoted to prove why the less developed parts of the world cannot be developed applied equally strongly to the present developed countries in the period prior to their development. Argument is only true in this sense. The less developed world will not become developed through the goodwill or generosity of the developed powers. It can only become developed through a struggle against the external forces which have a vested interest in keeping it underdeveloped. Of these forces, neocolonialism, at this stage in history, the principal. I propose to analyze neocolonialism first by examining the state of the African continent and showing how neocolonialism at the moment keeps it artificially poor. Next, I propose to show how, in practice, African unity, which in itself can only be established by the defeat of neocolonialism, could immensely raise African living standards. From this beginning, I propose to examine neocolonialism generally. First historically, then by a consideration of the great international monopolies whose continued stranglehold on the neocolonial sectors of the world ensures the continuation of the system. There's your introduction, chat. What do you think? What are we thinking so far? Does this sound like it's going to be a good read to you or what? Sounds like it's going to be good to me. Someone link this here.
Socialism hasn't gone anywhere. It has been betrayed, yes. But betrayal doesn't mean collapse. Perhaps they get confused because at least Judas had the dignity after betraying Christianity to hang himself. Gorbachev is still running around the world picking up pieces of silver. Must be clear here and not confused. I'm a socialist. One other thing I must tell you now. They confuse people about socialism. Brother the other day said, why ain't no socialist? I said, why not, brother? He said, because it's a white thing. I said, oh, really? You see, Europe tries to make believe that everything that comes out of the world comes out of Europe. I told the man, I said, socialism ain't no white thing.
Oh, Kwame,
he said, yes, it is.
yeah.
He said, Karl Marx discovered it. I told him, Karl Marx never discovered socialism. He cannot. You call the laws of gravity...
By the way, just so you know, Kwame Ture, if you don't know, Kwame Ture used to be, before changing his name, what was it? Carmichael something? But he actually got his name from Kwame Nkrumah and Ture Sekur. Yeah, Stokely Carmichael, that's it. So those are the two people he got his name from, was Kwame Nkrumah and Socrator.
Newton's laws. I'm
So
sure
we're
there's a
actually
mnemonic
reading one of
device
his
to help you on your
inspirations.
quizzes. But you
Thank you,
certainly
Jack.
cannot believe that Isaac Newton can found that a body falls at the rate of 32 feet per second squared per second squared. He can't find this. He can't discover it. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it, discover the law. If I'm sitting in Timbuktu in Africa, and I've never heard of Sir Isaac Newton, and I'm conducting any experiments with gravity, I will come to the same conclusion that he does. A body in motion tends to stay in motion unless stopped by an outside force. He cannot invent this. He can only observe it and record it. Karl Marx did not invent socialism. If I'm sitting in Libya, in the deserts, and I'm doing any research with capital and labor without ever having heard of Karl Marx, I will come to the same conclusion that he did. That any time capital seeks to dominate labor, there'll be a ruthless, uncompromising struggle on the part of labor until it comes to crush capital and dominate it. This is a fact. My history demonstrates that. We came here as chattel slaves for centuries. We fought and fought and fought until we crushed it. Now we're just slave of the wage, and now we've got to rise up and crush that one. That's to declare that Karl Marx didn't invent socialism. It's there for all to see. Karl Marx's great contribution to the world was in the area of historical materialism and dialectical materialism, something you need to know if you know about socialism. But since you don't know about socialism, you don't even know the words. And not only does the enemy keep you ignorant, you stay ignorant. You won't ever go read a book about socialism. Why read a book about socialism? They already told me in my class it ain't no good. You will not even read a book about socialism. Why, you don't even read a book about your history. We come to inspire you to learn. We come to tell you that when you come to serve a people, you must know as much as you can. The more you know, the better able you are to serve the people.
Yep. And like this, by the way, is the same. It's the same thing for Juche, by the way, comrades. Those people who refuse to like study Juche because it's not explicitly labeling itself as Marxism, Leninism, or something like this, are doing themselves a disservice.
Must not get confused.
Because Juche, like Marxism, Leninism before it, discovers principles and laws that exist objectively. And that's why, that's why the other day I wanted us to read from my theory list. That's why we read Che Guevara the other day. And actually, comrades, speaking of which, yeah, we read Che Guevara the other day for that reason, right? Because I wanted to show you how similar Juche works are to that. Yeah, we will someday read Kim Jong-il on cinema. But see, I read Fundamentals of Revolutionary Party Building here as a live read. Okay, Lennon. Have fun at the skate park, comrade. I mean, Barry. DPRK Cinema is great. We actually watched this morning on the channel. I don't know how many of you were here. We have pretty low viewers while we're watching it, but before you comrades came in, we actually were watching part of this video series here called Bulletproof Wall. This is a DPRK Korean TV serial drama that takes place during the occupation of Korea by Japanese imperialists. This is a really good television show, and I highly recommend it. It's really good. Apparently, Washington Post recently ran an article confirming that Ukraine hit the Nord Stream pipeline. Wow. I mean, doesn't surprise me, though. Yeah, so if you want to listen to me talk about Chi, I got it here on my stuff. Oh, nice. Nation and Destiny? Yeah. See, I got my reads here on the YouTube now for you all. Kim Jong-il was an awful writer. That's someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah, look at this troll. Yeah, Nation and Destiny is a great series. Look at these people. He's bringing these utter. Okay, well, you don't need to be on the channel. You don't need to be on the channel. I just block people from the channel. I'm just like, yep, fuck you. Fuck you. See ya. Anyone give me a yeah, see ya? This guy too. Fuck. Nobody needs to see trolls. Don't feed the trolls. Give me a yeah, see ya in chat.
Yeah. See ya.
Thank you. Thank you, Tool, for Twitch. He also wrote about opera as well, I do believe. I'm just looking at her meme channel, see if anybody left anything good in here. Oh yeah, Kim Jong-il was quite a writer. Oh, here's a good one from Cass. Here we go. Canadian Parliament gives standing ovation to Mecha Hitler for role in fighting Russians. Is it safe to buy books from DPRK websites? I mean, if they'll ship to you, if they can make it to you, the worst thing that's gonna happen is like the book just won't make it to you, right? Are you in the U.S.? Yeah, U.S. Yeah. So there's a chance then that the books just won't make it to you. What tends to be the case. I mean, you can take the chance, but yeah, there is ways you can get DPRK books and stuff. Like, there's one seller called North Korea Books or something like that, and they're actually based in Canada, and they have locations in China. And what they do is they send it there. So they actually buy the book in China and send it to their Montreal office, and then they sell it from there. Yeah, Jeremiah, we don't know how this happened. We didn't know he was a Nazi. We had no idea. We didn't know what that meant. That would be exactly Canada's response, absolutely. That website I just mentioned. If it comes up. Here we go. This one right here. This is the one that I use. It's under maintenance right now, but this is where you can get physical copies. And again, the place is like based in Canada somewhere. And then they have a location in China as well. It sucks because of course you're paying an inflated price that way, but It's the way that you can get it without having to worry about it not making it to you. You know that the Albanian monarch, besides being a loser for being a monarch, he had a son who went on crusades in Rhodesia trying to keep the settler colonial state. Wow, that is fucking disgusting. Okay, we'll do this last part, or we'll just do this next part. That way we can say we officially started the read. I think will we? Yeah, we should. I'll just have to cut out a little middle section when I do this. I'll take a big old puff. Someone redeem the 420. No worries, comrade. No worries. I was actually pondering whether I was gonna watch. I was thinking either we could watch like this hour-long video thing, or we could read the next. We could just read the next chapter of this work and then go on to the candy. So I'm just mostly trying to decide whether we read just this next chapter, then go on to the candy, or would you comrades rather we watch the Abby Martin video and then go to the candy? What would you rather? I'm here to serve you, so how about that? That seems like
if Hamas really does get to a
so and do a poll. I'm gonna do a poll. What now, chat? What now, chat? Do you want me to read the next chapter of what we're on right now? And so this will mean that we'll do the Abby Martin video a different day, by the way, depending on what you choose. So either we can continue on with the read, and then we'll go on to the candy, which is all the nerd stuff that I have. Or we can listen to this talk right here from Breakthrough News. Abby Martin on Lebanon intervention. All right, here we go. Here is your poll, chat. While I have some water here, I'll let you decide. Do you want me to continue our read, or would you rather we save the next part of the read for Thursday, and we watch this Abby Martin video that I've got? Will Lebanon go to war to save Gaza? Is the watch. So the polls in chat, we can continue the read, or we can do the Abby Martin Empire Files. Will Lebanon go to war to save Gaza? Let you decide. Should I put on like some Jeopardy music? Vote in chat. Absolutely powerful, they should. I'm gonna fill up my water, hold on. Wow. Okay, it's looking pretty decisive here in chat. Seven to 0, chat. Right. Oh, by the way, I think the kitty's in the window. I can't see her though because the window's so bright. Look, she's there, chat, but you can't see her. Most of us have probably already seen the breakthrough news clip. Yeah. And Sam, this is kind of what I'm thinking more and more. You know? I'm thinking we're gonna kind of steer away from doing that kind of streaming. Where we're just watching videos. I think we're gonna steer away from that like as much as possible, other than like news clips and short clips like that. Other than like when we do candy, of course. But I think generally, unless it's like, I'm kind of thinking like, unless it's Malma or unless it's Lushaba or something like this that's less seen on other places, we're generally going to try and focus more on talking and reading and stuff like that. Now, of course, we're still gonna be watching stuff, like I say, but I think we should try and focus like now. Try and focus on like a variety of things. And that's why I think like we should try and maybe keep any of the work, which is I've appreciated lately. Sam, anytime it's linked something longer, has said this is the parts where I think we should watch, which is so very much appreciated. Now there'll still be days, of course, when we'll do some longer watches as well. So any of those, like the Kwame Ture Zionism debate lecture, I have that saved for when we have a longer day to watch something that's longer, right? I haven't got to watch much of it yet, Powerful. I'm gonna check out. I am gonna check some out. I do like to watch it before I show much of it. Okay, so we'll do this. The only long video I really got today, I got James Stephanie Sterling here as part of our candy. We have a James Stephanie Sterling video. And then we have the video game years 1985. Because, you know, I'm kind of a nerd as well. So, that's our candy. That's the longest video. I'm thinking when we want to keep them like an hour, around an hour or less. So if you do make video suggestions in there that are longer, if you can specify a particular part, that is ideal. And get more likely that we'll play it on stream that way. Because I do want to incorporate live Juche lessons, because like in my Google documents here, I'm just sitting on all of these scripts here, and I figure like why don't we start going through these on stream, and I'll just like use this big camera so everybody can see me and chat well, and then can like talk about it live, right? And get into like a whole thing. I'll bring up Paint or something. I'll like work out a special window for it, where I can bring up Paint and like, you know, draw little diagrams up and stuff. Maybe, I don't know. We're still trying to figure out the niche here, comrade. So I'm relying on you all to help me as well. And you can use the content suggestion panel in our Discord to help me with that as well. Whether you're linking me works that you want me to read, I do have quite a good amount of reads now that we have, as well as their theory list. And I have our, of course, Iskra books reads that we can get to as well. So we have no shortage of stuff we can do. I just think that we should avoid the same content that others are. Sorry. Don't mind me going on long-winded rambles. I guess that's part of it as well. All right, so we'll do this chapter and then we will do our candy for the day. And then my fiance wants to fight me in Soul Calibur. Right before we start that, I'm gonna give you a prediction in chat, okay? And I'm gonna make a prediction in chat where you all can predict whether myself or whether she will win the overall like tournament. Okay? Yeah, you can predict for yourself. All right, so we'll do that once we're done. Once we're done the politics drink, we'll finish this chapter. We'll get into the candy, and then my fiance and I will fight each other in bloody battle to the death for your enjoyment. I would like us to smoke a joint before we do it too. We can do that while we're watching some of the candy. Meg, I feel like we should have a command thing on here that's like don't mind the streamer or like that talks about the fact that I rant sometimes or something. I feel like that's needed. Read this book when I was 14 called what type of Kwame is the fiance? Well, she more or less just like agrees with me basically. Yeah. Her position is in agreement with me basically. Yeah. Before me, she was ignorance is bliss kind of person, so. You know. Read this book when I was 14 called Terror in the Mind of God. They apparently made an updated version since the author died. I don't want to recommend it because I can't remember a lot of it, but it's pretty long, a detailed section with pics of history of Palestine, Israel. I think what we'll do sometime, we might I think we might, at some point through the week, take a moment and read this article that we got here in Peace, Land, and Bread. We got this really good article in Peace, Land, and Bread right here. Why doesn't it come up on that? Was it on this side? It's this. I think we're going to read this at some point soon because on here, I believe it's this issue, there's a thing about Zionism. I thought it was this issue. Ireland. Yeah, here we go. Yep, this is it. So we're going to read this sometime this week. Sacred dialectic. Sacred secular dialectic. Zionist superstructure in Palestine. So we'll read this at some point, I think this week. Maybe tomorrow. Just as a way of like breaking out of the overly we still will watch stuff. I just want to kind of steer away from watching stuff all day every day. Do that. All right, let us continue on. We'll finish this chapter and then we'll go to the candy. Kwame Nkrumah, 1965. Continue on with neocolonialism. Africa's resources. Africa is a paradox, which illustrates and highlights neocolonialism. Her earth is rich, yet the products that come from above and below her soil continue to enrich, not Africans predominantly, but groups and individuals who operate to Africa's impoverishment. With a roughly estimated population of 280 million, about 8% of the world's population, Africa accounts for only 2% of the world's total production. Yet, even the present very inadequate surveys of Africa's natural resources show the continent to have immense untapped wealth. We know that iron reserves are put at twice the size of America's, and 2/3 those of Soviet Union's, on the basis of an estimated 2 billion metric tons. Africa's calculated coal reserves are considered to be enough to last for 300 years. New petroleum fields are being discovered and brought into production all over the continent. Yet, production of primary ores and minerals, considerable as it appears, has touched only the fringes. Africa has more than 40% of the world's potential water power, a greater share than any other continent. Yet, less than 5% of this volume has been utilized. Even taking into account the vast desert stretches of the Sahara, there is still in Africa more arable and pastured land than exists in either the United States of America or the Soviet Union. There is even more than in Asia. Our forest areas are twice as great as those of the United States. If Africa's multiple resources were used in her own development, they could place her among the modernized continents of the world. But her resources have been and are still being used for the greater development of overseas interests. Africa provided to Britain in 1957 the following proportions of basic material used in her industries. Wow. Look at the proportions of this. Look at this. The portion of their industries provided by Africa of these various things. Antimony, 91%. Cobalt, 82%. Asbestos, 66%. Chrome ore, 50%. Bauxite, 47%. Copper, 46%. Manganese, 80%. 29% of the iron ore. And 19% of the tin ore concentrates. French, 100% of phosphates, 85% lead, 51% zinc, 6% of iron ore, and 32% of cotton ore. And to Germany, 71% of phosphorites, 22% of chrome ore, manganese ore is at 20%, 12% of the lead ore, 10% of the iron ore, and 8% of the copper imports. Yet in none of the new African countries is there a single integrated industry based upon any of these resources. Although possessing 53 of the world's most important basic industrial minerals and metals, the African continent tails far behind all others in industrial development. Gauged on the production of primary products output in the total economic activity, by comparison, With the country of most advanced production, the United States, the facts can be seen at a glance. So this is in percentages here. Industry and manufacturer, United States, 30%. If you come up the rest of the table, that. Meanwhile, forestry, agriculture, fishing, mining, right? And with transportation, it's select few and some are just excluded than others. But this is the most important figure right here. Industry and manufacturing. Compare this to the rest. Then you compare that with the raw extraction industries in comparison to that as well. It will be noted that in America, agriculture, forestry, and fishing provide a mere 4% of the total national activity, and mining a trifling 1%. On the other hand, industry, manufacture, and commerce provide 47%. In the African countries included in the table, which are, with the exception of Nigeria, those with the highest settler communities, and therefore the most exploited, agriculture is predominant. Industry, manufacture, and commerce lag far behind. Even in the case of South Africa, the most highly industrialized sector of the African continent, the contribution of agriculture, 12%, and mining, 13%, are equal to those of industry, manufacture, and construction put together. However, on the whole, mining has proved a most profitable venture for foreign capital investment in Africa. Its benefits for Africans have by no means been on an equal scale. Mining production in a number of African countries has a value of less than $2 per head of population. As Europe, France, Odermeyer puts it, it is quite certain that a mining production of $1 or $2 per inhabited cannot appreciably affect the country's standard of living. Affirming correctly that in the zones of exploitation, the mining industry introduces a higher standard of living. The journal, if forced to the conclusion that mining exploitations are, however, relatively privileged isolated islands in a very poor total economy. The reason for this is seen in the absence of industry and manufacture, owing to the fact that mining production is destined principally for exportation, mainly in primary form. It goes to feed the industries and factories of Europe and America, to the impoverishment of the countries of origin. It is also remarked by Europe, France, Odermeyer, that about 50% of Africa's mining production remains in the country of origin as wages. Even the most cursory glance at the annual accounts of the mining companies refutes this claim. The excess of revenue over expenditure in many cases proves conclusively by its size that wages received by manual labor form by no means such an exaggerated proportion of value produced as 50%. The considerable sums which go in highly paid salaries to European staffs in the skilled and administrative categories, part of which is returned to their own countries, must in many instances amount to the total received by African labor, to say nothing of the large amounts which swell the yearly incomes of wealthy directors who reside in the metropolitan cities of the West. The assumption also ignores another important fact, namely that wages of manual workers, low as they are partly spent on goods manufactured abroad and imported, taking out of the primary producing countries a good part of the worker's wage. In many cases, the imported goods are the products of the companies associated with the mining group. Frequently, they are sold in companies' own stores, on the mining compounds, or by their appointed agents. The workers having to pay prices fixed by the companies. The poverty of the people of Africa is demonstrated by the simple fact that their income per capita is among the lowest in the world. So here's their income per capita. Notice how many of them are in the under $80 category. Starts from 1960, 1960. Absolutely, but they have wealth. They are exploited. The only reason why the people have no wealth, it's being stolen. You can see it being stolen. In some countries, for example, Gabon and Zambia, up to half of the domestic product is paid to resident expatriates and to overseas firms who own the plantations and mines. Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Libya, Swaziland, Southwest Africa, and Zimbabwe, foreign firm profits and settler or expatriate incomes exceed 1/3 of the domestic product. Algeria, Congo, and Kenya were in this group before independence. On achieving independence, almost every new state of Africa has developed plans for industrialization and rounded economic growth in order to improve productive capacity and thereby raise the standard of living of its own people. But while Africa remains divided, progress is bound to be painfully slow. Economic development is dependent not only on the availability of natural resources, the size of the population of a country, but on economic size, which takes into account both population and income per capita. In many African states, the population and per capita products are extremely small, giving an economic unit no longer than a medium-sized firm in a Western capitalist country, or a single-state enterprise in a European socialist economy. Africa is having to pay a huge price once more for the historical accident that this vast and compact continent brought fabulous profits to Western capitalism. First out of the trade in its people, and then out of imperialist exploitation. This enrichment of one side of the world out of the exploitation of the other has left the African economy without the means to industrialize. At the time when Europe passed into its industrial revolution, there was a considerably narrower gap in development between the continents. But with every step in the evolution of productive methods and the increased profits drawn from the more and more shrewd investments in manufacturing equipment and base metal production, the gap widened by leaps and bounds. The report of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, published in December 1962, under the title of Industrial Growth in Africa, states that the gap between the continents separated by the Mediterranean has widened faster in the 20th century than ever before. True, per capita output has increased in Africa, particularly in the last 2 decades, which have seen an increase of some 10 to 20%. Already far ahead, the industrial countries have marked a per capita advance in the same period of 60%. And their per capita industrial production may be estimated as high as 25 times that in Africa as a whole. The difference for the greater part of Africa, however, is even more marked, since industry on this continent tends to be concentrated in small areas in the north and south. A real transformation of the African economy would mean not only doubling agricultural output, but increasing industrial output some 25 times. The report makes plain that industry rather than agriculture is the means by which rapid improvement in Africa's living standards is possible. There are, however, imperialist specialists and apologists who urge the less developed countries to concentrate on agriculture and leave industrialization for some later time when their population shall be well fed. World's economic development, however, shows that it is only with advanced industrialization that it has been possible to raise the nutritional level of the people by raising their levels of income. Agriculture is important for many reasons, and the governments of African states concerned with bringing higher standards to their people are devoting greater investment to agriculture. But even to make agriculture yield more, the aid of industrial output is needed. And the underdeveloped world cannot forever be placed at the mercy of the more industrialized. This dependence must slow the rate of increase in our agriculture and make it subservient to the demands of the industrial producers. That is why we cannot accept such sweeping assessments as that made by Professor Leopold G. Scheidel of the Vienna School of Economics at a recent meeting in London of International Geographical Congress. Commented Professor Scheidel, quote, "People in developing countries seem to think that all that is necessary for them to become wealthy is to build, as the West is to build factories. Most experts agree that it is wiser and more promising to develop agriculture into self-sufficiency and on to the level of a marketing economy," unquote. That's from the Times, 24th of July, 1964. This train of thought links up directly with that of chairman of Booker Brothers, Sir Jock Campbell, whose combine of companies is busy monopolizing sugar, byproduct industries in British Guiana, shipping and trading in the Caribbean and East Africa, and is now penetrating into the west of the African continent. Sir Jock Campbell asserted at the annual address of the African Bureau in London 29th of November 1962 that agriculture was the basis of African development and that plantations were an effective method of increasing economic potential, unquote. He considered that so long as industrialized agriculture employed men free to come and go, it was preferable in terms of both efficiency and liberty to the communized collective farming whose result had fallen so short of expectations in Russia and China. Unquote. Again, from the Times, 30th of November 1962. He does not seem to have convinced the sugar workers of British Guiana, and it is a moot point whether he has been able to impress the benefits of his free-to-come-and-go plantation philosophy on the workers for his companies in Nyasaland, Rhodesia, and South Africa. Even the scientific supporters of the imperialist pattern are aware of the flaws in their injunctions, but they cunningly attribute the emphasis placed by the developing states upon industrialization to political ambitions, rather than an economic and social necessity. A European representative of the University of Malaya, Mr. D.W. Fryer, speaking at the meeting of International Geographical Conference, to which reference is made above, said that an increase in the efficiency of traditional export industries in the underdeveloped countries was an obvious move, but it was politically unattractive. It suggested that continued acceptance of the old colonial economy. Industrialism was an integral part of the nationalist movement. Its mainspring was not economic but political, and political expediency was often more important than economic efficiency in the location of new industry. Unquote. The more efficient management of primary production and improvement on a marketing level is imperialism's gain and our loss. The point has been made quite clearly by no less a person than the chairman of Bolsa, the Bank of London and South America, Sir George Bolton. The latter was reported in the Financial Times of 6 March 1964 as being confident of a rise in commodity prices, which would have considerable effect on the foreign exchanges. For whose benefit? Sir George provides the answer. It should help the reserve currencies sterling and the dollar. Dead. Why? Because being tied to these currencies, the primary producers will be accumulating their surpluses in sterling and dollar balances. This appears to be nothing short of a direct confession of the major interests of the banking and financial world in the exploitation of the developing countries. It is interesting, therefore, to note that Bolsa's transfer agents in London and Patno Mines and Enterprises consolidated, the American-controlled Combine operating mines in Latin America and Canada, and intimately associated with the groups engaged in exploiting Africa's natural resources. We are certainly not against marketing and trading. On the contrary, we are for widening of our potentialities in these spheres, and we are convinced that we shall be able to adjust the balance in our favor only by developing an agriculture attuned to our needs and supporting it with a rapidly increasing industrialization that will break the neocolonialist pattern, which at present operates. A continent like Africa, however, much it increases its agricultural output, will not benefit unless it is sufficiently politically and economically united to force the developed world to pay it at a fair price for its cash crops. To give one illustration, both Ghana and Nigeria have in post-war independence period enormously developed their production of cocoa, as the table shows. Check it out. Look at the expansion, a steady increase. That the result has not been obtained by chance. It is the consequence of having heavy internal expenditure on control of disease and pests, the subsidizing of insecticides, and the spraying machines provided to farmers, and the importing of new varieties of cocoa seedlings, which are resistant to the endemic ills which previously cocoa trees had developed. By means such as these, Africa has wholly greatly increased her cocoa production, while that of Latin America remains stationary. What advantage has Nigeria or Ghana gained through this stupendous increase in agricultural productivity? In 1954 and 55, when Ghana production was 210,000 tons, her 1954 earnings from the cocoa crop were 85 pounds, half million. This year, 64-65, with an estimated crop of 590,000 tons, the estimated external earnings will be around 77 million. Nigeria has suffered a similar experience. 1954-55, she produced 89,000 tons of beans and received for her crop 39.25 million. In 1965, it is estimated that Nigeria will produce 310 tons and is likely to receive for it around 40 million. In other words, Ghana and Nigeria have trebled their production of this particular agricultural product, but their gross earnings from it have fallen from 125 million to 117 million. A detailed study of production and price shows that it is the developed consuming country which obtains the advantage of the increased production in the less developed one. So long as African agricultural producers are disunited, they will be unable to control the market price of their primary products. As experience with the Cocoa Producers Alliance has shown, any organization which is based on mere commercial agreement between primary producers is insufficient to secure a fair world price. This can only be obtained when the united power of the producer countries is harnessed by common political and economic policies, and has behind it the united financial resources of the states concerned. So long as Africa remains divided, it will therefore be a wealthy consumer countries who will dictate the price of African cash crops. Nevertheless, even in Africa could dictate the price of its cash crops, this would not by itself provide the balanced economy which is necessary for development. Answer must be industrialization. The African continent, however, cannot hope to industrialize effectively in the haphazard, laissez-faire manner of Europe. In the first place, there is the time factor. In the second, the socialized modes of production and tremendous human and capital investments involved call for cohesive and integrated planning. Planning, chat. Planning. Even central planning? Africa will need to bring to its aid all the latent ingenuity and talent in order to meet the challenge that independence and the demands of the people for better living have raised. The challenge cannot be met by piecemeal scale, but only by the total mobilization of the continent's resources within the framework of comprehensive socialist planning and deployment. He said it, Bop. He said the word. We have noted that in the countries of the highest settler populations, and therefore the most exploited so far in Africa, Algeria, Congo, Kenya, Morocco, Rhodesia, Malawi, South Africa, Tanganyika, agriculture is predominant. In the case of South Africa, the most highly developed area of the African continent, the contribution of agriculture and mining is together equal to that of industry, manufacture, and construction. South Africa's economy is heavily bolstered by the export of its mining output. Gold contributes up to nearly 70% of the total exports, which makes the economy, all its apparent bloom, and the heavily increasing foreign investments basically almost as insecure as that of the less developed countries of the continent. For all its pushing secondary industries, its chemical manufacture, military production, steel processing, and the rest, South Africa has so far failed to lay down the basis of solid industrialization. D.E. Manuel, chairman of Anglo-Transvaal Consolidation Investment Company, which controls gold, diamond, and uranium, made a most telling statement in his annual address on the 6th of December 1963 to the Johannesburg shareholders meeting. Quote, "The nation's economy is based to a significant degree on wasting assets. The gold mine in the Transvaal and Orange Free State. We have become more and more aware of this in recent years, as more mines near the end of their lives without any sign of new large gold fields, in spite of many millions being spent on exploration. Investment in South Africa's economy comes mainly from Western capital, with which local finance, not hardly enough to stand on its own 2 feet, is strongly bound. Quick profits are the incentive, so that while Anglo-Transvaal chairman sees the danger to the economy, he was nonetheless happy to be able to announce that record profits were again achieved in 1963. The whole of the economy is geared to the interests of foreign capital that dominates it. South Africa's banking institutions, like those of most other African states, are offshoots of the Western banking and financial houses. South Africa is dominated by Western monopoly, even more than any other sector of the continent, because the investments are many times greater, and the dependence upon gold and other mining as the center of the economy gears it intrinsically to that monopoly. Its vulnerability is intensified by the fact that it is a supplier of crude and semi-finished products to the factories of the West on a larger scale than the rest of Africa, and an earner of greater profits for the financial backers. Nigeria tells in a few basic figures a tale of a different kind of economic maladjustment. In 1960, agriculture, forestry, and fishing accounted for 63% of the economic activity. Mining, 1%. The imbalance is emphasized by the extremely low ratio of 2% for industry and manufacture, eliminating at once any comparison with the 1% contribution of mining and 4% of agriculture to America's total economic product. In the case of the United States, this low proportion supports a vast superstructure of industry and manufacture. Nigeria, it connotes simply a total disregard under colonialism of Nigeria's potentialities. The reason for this lies not in the fact that Nigeria is devoid of natural industrial resources, as recent findings of oil and iron confirm. It was that Nigeria's agriculture provided greater profitability for European investment than the risks that were involved in a larger capital provisions called for by mining exploration and exploitation. In 1962, petroleum and petroleum products contributed 9.9% to Nigeria's exports, but it is Shell BP that hopes to reap most of the benefits. The bulk of these exports was in crude oil, exceeding 3 million tons. The oil company is aiming at the export target of 5 million tons of crude oil by 1965. Processing plants are in Europe, not in Nigeria. The oil refinery going up in Port Harcourt is owned by Shell BP. The natural gas piping is owned by Shell Barclays DC&O. The oil refinery is meant to handle only 10% of Nigeria's crude oil output, and its products will only serve Nigeria's domestic market. Such an arrangement makes it possible not to disturb operations outside Nigeria while making super profits on Nigerian operations. Generally speaking, in spite of the exploration costs, which are written off for tax purposes anyway, and many times covered by eventual profits, mining has proved a very profitable venture for foreign capital investments in Africa. It benefits for the Africans, on the other hand, despite all the frothy talk to the contrary, has been negligible. This is explained by the absence of industry and manufacture based upon the use of domestic natural resources, and of that trade that is their continent. For mining production is destined principally for exportation and its primary form. Certain exceptions to this generalization are to be found in South Africa, Zambia, the Congo. Some small conversion has been taking place also in countries like Morocco, Algeria, Mozambique. South Africa's copper is exported in the form of metal, and a small part of its iron is sent overseas as ingots. The gold is refined. But for these exceptions, most exported minerals are shipped from Africa in their primary state. They go to feed the industries and plants of Europe, America, Japan. The ore that is to be produced in Swaziland by the Swaziland Iron Ore Development Company, owned jointly by Anglo-American Corporation, the powerful British steel group Gascan and Nettlefolds, will go at a rate of 1,200,000 tons annually for 10 years, from 1964 to a Japanese steel combine. Wasn't there also like several coups and fuckery from the West that put leaders willing to... Yes, absolutely, in Nigeria. Yes. When the countries of their origin are obliged to buy back their minerals and other raw products in the form of finished goods, they do so at grossly inflated prices. A General Electric advertisement carried in the March-April 1962 issue of Modern Government informs us that from the heart of Africa to the hearths of the world's steel mill comes ore for stronger steel, better steel, steel for buildings, machinery, and more steel rails. With this steel from Africa, General Electric supplies transportation for bringing out another valuable mineral for its own use, and that of other great imperialist exploiters. Less verbiage, the same advertisement describes how deep in the tropical jungle of Central Africa lies one of the world's richest deposits of manganese ore. But is it for Africa's needs? Not at all. This site, which is being developed by the French concern Champagne Minière de Ogouve, is located on the upper reach of the Ogouve River in the Gabon Republic. After the ore is mined, it will be carried 50 miles by cableway. Then it will be transferred into ore cars and hauled 300 miles by diesel electronic locomotives to the port of Pointe Noire for shipment to the world's steel mills. For the world, read the United States first and France second. The exploitation of this nature can take place is due to the balkanization of the African continent. Balkanization is the major instrument of neocolonialism and will be found wherever neocolonialism is practiced. There you go. There's our first official chapter. So, and this point right here is basically setting the stage up for the rest of the work, this whole book. Exploitation of this nature can take place is due to the balkanization of the African continent. Balkanization is the major instrument of neocolonialism and will be found wherever neocolonialism is practiced. So when we come back on Thursday, then we will be starting with chapter